And thank you for joining. We're getting started just momentarily, and we'll do introductions at that time. And Mallory, are you typing? No. Okay. And for the presenters or organizers, please make sure to mute your lines if you find that you are typing. Good, and we will get started in one moment. One of our panelists' computer decided.
Oh, you don't need to wait for me.
All right.
Absolutely not.
Well,
No, we should get started.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started. Very good. Okay. Well, welcome and welcome everybody. We're going to get underway here for this webinar, which is strategies to recruit, broaden the audience, and retain volunteers. I do apologize. You are hearing the beeps of people join as they join, but that should diminish here momentarily. You're hearing that through my phone. I'm Susan Klein of the Keystone Policy Center, and we thank you for attending this webinar today. We look forward to an engaging discussion with our panelists and with you all. Real quick piece about Keystone Policy Center. Keystone has a 40-year history of independent convening and facilitation in the environment, energy, and health sectors. This webinar today is one of two we're holding this month, and this webinar is in connection with an EPA Great Lakes Restoration Initiative grant for stakeholder engagement in the Lake Huron Basin. A couple of really quick housekeeping matters. All the audience lines are muted, and so please use the chat function to offer comments or questions that you have. Feel free to write those at any point over the course of the webinar, and we'll be monitoring that and grabbing hold of those and presenting those to the panelists to address. For the most part, we're holding questions, but may be ones that are helpful questions of clarification at midpoint during a presentation, and we'll make sure that we address those as we go. We want to extend a welcome and deep thanks to our panelists, Lisa Rush, Jason Frenzel, and Joy Lyson, each of whom has extensive experience building and managing volunteer webinar programs. I will provide a brief introduction to each of our panelists, and then we'll go ahead and get started with Lisa. But Lisa Brush is co-founder and executive director of the Stewardship Network. Lisa has engaged thousands of professionals and volunteers in identifying community and conservation needs of the 21st century and determining strategic support the network can provide. We also are joined by Jason Frenzel, the Huron River Watershed Council. As stewardship coordinator for Huron River Watershed Council, Jason facilitates current and potential watershed stewards. Previously, Jason worked with the City of Ann Arbor's Natural Area Preservation Program and for 10 years as its volunteer and outreach coordinator. And we are also joined by Joy Lyson at Huron Pines. Joy is Special Projects Coordinator at Huron Pines and works directly with their AmeriCorps members, ambassadors, volunteers, and all members of the staff to make connections between projects and within the community. So without further delay, we can go ahead and get started. And Lisa will turn that over to you and Jason, as I understand your tag team.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Susan. Appreciate it. Great to be here with you all online. Great to see so many colleagues online that we've worked with for many decades together, and great to see many new folks as well. So I want to thank you all online for going ahead and introducing yourself. If you haven't done that, go ahead and take a moment and introduce yourself. It's a great chance to be with each other from all across North America. And I know that we have online many experienced volunteer coordinators as well. So I hope that you all will share not only the questions that you have, but the experience and ideas that you have. I think that we learn a lot from each other as we continue to work with volunteers. So if we could have the next slide, that'd be great. So one of the things we'll do is we'll start out and just give you a little bit of background on kind of thinking generally about engaging volunteers in the work that we do, and then we'll talk some specifically. And I do encourage you all to share your questions and comments as they come up. We'd love to hear them. So in general, engaging with volunteers can be, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, it can be a leap for organizations to begin to think about how to work with volunteers. There's often the question about what are we as an organization going to get out of it? Is it going to be more work than it's worth? But really, one of the reasons that we involve volunteers in the work that we do is not only just being able to get more things done. It's just phenomenal that when you bring in a group of people, the kinds of things that can happen, whether that's out in the field doing restoration work, whether that's putting events on, whether that's providing community education. And we're talking about this now in the field of natural areas and ecological restoration, but certainly in our communities, volunteers are really a backbone of civic engagement and the work that we do. And then the other reason that we engage volunteers is to get additional expertise. So as an example of that, the Stewardship Network engaged a group of people that we called our executive advisors. And so people who've been engaged in running organizations at all kinds of different levels and have decades of experience to offer us. And so we engaged them as we were growing as an organization. And so bringing in additional expertise, or if you're doing a bio blitz where you're doing a 24-hour survey of all of the plants and animals that are in a given location, you'll bring in all kinds of additional expertise, and those folks could be specific scientists, they could be herpetologists, and they could be lepidopterists, and they could be, thank you Josh, they could help you with all of that specific survey work. And then in addition, engaging volunteers brings a whole other level of community support. And so without those volunteers, you might be a staff of anywhere from 3 to, I'm going to say 200, but then you're limited to that group of people. But once you engage additional volunteers, you're engaging thousands of different community support for the work and mission that you do. And Joy will give us some great examples of that as well. One of the things, typically, volunteers end up being great financial supporters of an organization. And so that may be one of the ways that they first engage with your organization is as a community volunteer doing specific volunteer work, and then they become a financial supporter of the idea of the mission as well. And then there's also the whole concept of community change, and just by engaging volunteers in a community effort, you create change within your neighborhood, your community, your city, village, township, your county, or your larger region. And so you can't underestimate that concept of community change that comes from that. As well as the idea of additional expertise, you just get fresh ideas. I mean, I love the idea that volunteers have come in and they've suggested all kinds of different things. And so allowing volunteers to have a role in sharing their ideas about the work that you do. And again, we'll get into other specific examples of that. And then if we could have the next slide, we can talk a little bit about some of the types of volunteers and why they volunteers. So generally speaking, I've been mentioning individuals who volunteer. Then you'll have the groups. You'll have the banks who have a day of service. You'll have the corporations who have a day of service. You'll have the school groups that are wanting to do something. And engaging with those individual groups is also really important. And we've got lots of great examples. That can be one of those intimidating things. So maybe you work with individual volunteers and you know you can get a call and you can do it. But when you get that call from that organization that says, we've got 30 people, or we've got 400 people that would like to volunteer, so that's often something that in the beginning you say, oh, let me point you to another opportunity or another group that can be another challenge. And then subject experts. And then we'll talk a little bit about why these folks volunteer. So why don't we go to the next slide and talk a little bit about the groups. And so as I said, you might find those groups that volunteer, whether they're a school group or a work group, a corporation, an individual business, a neighborhood group, a team that wants to volunteer. And so team building is one of the reasons that they often do that. It's a chance to be with your group peers in a different kind of a setting. And so it can be, again, we talked about community change. It can be change for a group of peers in that sense. There's also the service learning. And so you'll see this in the chance to go and work with, so oftentimes church groups will do this kind of work where it's a service learning engagement or a chance to be and learn a different topic, a different subject. And we certainly have that. Again, we'll talk more specifically about those different kinds of things. Community recognition. So certainly the chance to be out in the community and be acknowledged for the work that you're doing. So I often think of corporations as groups that do that for that, but as well there are school groups that do that. And so you gain a reputation for that. It's a school, it's a community business that is engaged in the community, and you understand that through their service learning. And then it's also just internal goals. So again, like I was saying, you end up with a reputation of service, but it's an internal sense of the organization has a mission around that. And so as a workplace, employee satisfaction is listed as higher when corporations and groups are engaged in service learning. And then do you want to talk a little bit more about some of that, Jason?
When Lisa and I were putting these slides together a while back, I missed one here for groups. And here in the Midwest, as most people know, we lag 6 months or 5 years behind the coasts. And I've been seeing more and more on the East and West Coast for the last few years, tying corporate financial giving to corporate volunteerism. And so that tie internally with the different types of philanthropy is also starting to happen here in the Midwest more and more as I see it. If we could move on to the next slide, please. So I'd like to talk about why people volunteer. More generally speaking, what are the motivations for people to do things? We're all motivated by different aspects in our life and prioritize things in different ways. And there are, when you look into motivational theory, there are a suite of different types of theory on why people do stuff. And one of the things that I like to remind folks is altruism as a statement actually doesn't really exist. In the volunteer management theory realm, we've long given up on that idea because we always get something out of doing something. If it's for internal goals or external goals, we feel a sense of something for doing something. And so looking at motivational theory allows us the opportunity to put ourselves in other people's shoes and understand how our programming is alluring or helping them get what they would like out of their time and benefit their lives in that way. And so this 5-point theory, 5.1 theory is mine from researching a bunch of other types of motivational theory. A lot of people, and especially in the work that we're in around environmental work and stewardship work, a lot of folks want to see a betterment of the world. They want to get something done and improve the world in some way. And we recognize those people every day. The second point is social. Think about my grandma who's losing a lot of social people in her social circle, so she's looking for additional social opportunities that are tied to something else that's meaningful to her. And the same can be true for people who move into a town or into a location that are new. A lot of people want to learn. Obviously, learning and growing is a strong motivation for most folks. And we want to tie that learning opportunity into as many of our stewardship activities or volunteer activities as possible. Similarly, people that know something really find value and feel empowered and feel strengthened when they are able to teach others. And so offering those who have been around for a while the opportunity to lead, to coach, to share their expertise, because they've come out, 5 times or 500 times with your group, allowing them to take that opportunity and show the newbies how things are done can be really positively enforcing for them. Lastly is power. We don't see this as much in sort of field-based stewardship work, but it does come up sometimes. It's really easy to think about power as a motivational force when we're talking about people on board of directors. But it does come true in field-based work also. And so recognizing that some people are bringing all of those things to the table at different points in time is important. And then there's always the intrinsic motivations, which is food and kittens and babies and things of that nature. So having food at your events is important. I think one of the things that's really important to think about when you're cogitating on motivational forces is that we are at different points in time. These different motivational forces are true for each of us. So we don't know when our volunteers' motivations are shifting and changing within themselves. So offering as many of these things at as many opportunities and engagement locations as you can will maximize your potential for engaging them in the way that they feel is most meaningful at that time. So some of our examples will go through, Joy's examples will go through some of these issues. So can I hit the next slide, please? Here we talk about to me, the iterative cycle of recruitment. First and foremost, I think it's important to understand that when you're working with hordes of people, and always things are going to go wrong on occasion, but nearly every experience you have let's call it a learning opportunity. The opportunity to evaluate both needs to come at the end of the cycle on the bottom left there, but it also needs to be pervasive through your recruitment and implementation, so that when something goes wrong and a volunteer sees a crack in your system or that your programs aren't perfect, you give them the opportunity to help you fix your programming, and then you immediately turn lemons into lemonade and empower people to become stronger, more highly engaged with your programming. In the recruitment process, I like to say, if you don't know your organization or your programmatic goals at the beginning, you shouldn't be recruiting volunteers. If you can't say what they're trying to accomplish in the long run, you need to go back to the beginning, because it will create a lot of frustration for everyone involved. From the goals, you develop your program needs or your daily needs or what you need to get done, and that's we need to get more stewardship work done. We need to get more data collection. We need to fill some staffing issues. From there, you develop position descriptions. I'm a firm believer that you should, if you haven't done this, you should develop formal position descriptions on a regular basis until it's just part and parcel with what you do. Obviously, 3-hour events don't need long, 1 or 2 page position descriptions, but it's good to think through why you're recruiting someone, what they need to do, what are the qualifications, what they're going to get out of it. They're not going to get paid, but what are the benefits to them that feed back to those motivational forces.
And then, Jason, can I interject here? One of the other things that I think is really key in the way that we think about volunteers is that they are colleagues that you work with. It is not free labor. It's the idea that you are recruiting quality people to engage with you in the work that you do. You want to treat them professionally, and you want to give them the information that they need. And so we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about this as well, but the idea that, sure, you can fire volunteers, and so this is not something that is, you need to be beholden to them, but it really is a professional engagement in the way that we view this.
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to come back to that place when you think about pro bono volunteers who are, CPAs or lawyers, but it holds true of, a family coming out and volunteering on a Saturday. If you don't treat them with the respect that they presume that they should have in their workplace or with the rest of their time, they're not going to see our programming as fun, as living up to their lifestyle. And so understanding that these things can be professional in nature while being fun and accomplish amazing goals all at the same time is important. So from the position description, I make sure that I identify the types of, it's from those strengths that you need in the position description, identify the types of people that might fit into those positions. So I like to think about personality archetypes. My favorite example is at the Watershed Council, we work with tons of folks out in the water, and of course the quintessential personality archetype is the Trout Unlimited group, right? They have free time, they have free money, they're very invested in water resources, they love to be out in the water. It's a great example of, okay, these people fit a certain set of positions position descriptions that I might have, but that's not the same for other position descriptions. And you may have some positions where pretty much any able-bodied person can come out and help pull garlic mustard. Similarly, we do benthic macroinvertebrate study for water quality, and we have handicap accessible locations where people can go out. So it's more or less the general public that can come out to some events and fit some positions, but knowing which types of folks or how different segments of your society might engage with those particular positions gets you to how to recruit them. So then identifying the locations that you might communicate with those groups of people or those individuals. Is it through Twitter? Is it through a particular neighborhood newsletter? Is it through the corporation's email list? And then from that recruitment location, you identify, you tailor your message, because what you really want to do is hit the language that they're comfortable with, hit the appropriate type of language and information for the venue that you're transmitting it through. So Twitter and Facebook and blogs are really different types of information exchange. Similarly, if you're sending through a large corporation's email list, or if you want to be very careful to match their norms. And then through the tailoring of the message, you do your recruitment and you get people to show up. And at that point, you evaluate how that whole process works. So just a little theory about recruitment there.
Yeah, and so let's go to the next slide. But one of the other things that I want to, no, I'll just take it for a little bit later. But so let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And one of the questions I would encourage you all online, go ahead and post your ideas about where you post and advertise your volunteer opportunities. Because I think this is one of the challenges that you always have, especially when I'd also be interested in you all sharing how many of you are new to engaging with volunteers and are working on new volunteer programs versus how many who have been part of this. So when you're first starting, that's one of the biggest challenges, Jason, as you say, getting people to show up. And so generally speaking, there's the post the flyers. And I am surprised the Stewardship Network does a lot of electronic posting of event information. I never cease to be amazed that I'm at one of our events and I say to somebody, hey, how'd you hear about this event? Great to see you this morning. And they'll say, you know, I was getting a cup of coffee this morning and I saw the flyer and figured I'd come over. So there's always that kind of thing. So you can't underestimate that. I also think about the kinds of things that I personally have gone to. You know, there was an art show in somebody's backyard and I saw it because they posted a bunch of those kind of real estate signs out in the neighborhood. And so I think that making sure that you do those things are really important. So not only doing things online, but doing things out in the community. So posting flyers, doing press releases, so things show up in whatever print media you have in your community, as well as direct mail and other newsletters. Contacting other organizations and asking them to post that. We posted this webinar announcement to a number of different sources, and so you'll see that we've attracted people not only from across North America, but also from Europe as well. And so then you've got the e-blasts, all the social media. Be sure to do that, promoting on websites and other places, listing on event calendars. So let's rattle off a few here. Joy, you could unmute too and do some of those. So the Stewardship Network certainly has a calendar where you can post events. And then
volunteer match.
Mm-hmm.
Be Good. Plains of Light has one. Our local volunteer center has one.
United Ways.
Yeah,
and so there are lots of those.
Thank volunteers.
And then also the other as I just want to say, there's also university classes is a great way. And then, as Kirsten says, they get the most new volunteers from their existing volunteers. And so word of mouth is a huge source for that.
Superb.
Shall we go on to, let's go on to promoting the project and to the next slide then.
Thank you very much. So when, where are we at here?
Right here. So we're looking at, yep.
We're
So we should
looking
go
for slide promoting the project slide.
We should go back a couple too. And then as we talk about promoting the project, it's really important to be really specific about exactly what you're asking of people. Does the event run from 9 to noon? Are you asking people to volunteer on a board of directors that meets quarterly, that will then have monthly meetings in between, but really laying that out. And so as Jason talked about setting up the program in the beginning, really thinking about what those needs are, because that ought to be one of the first questions that folks ask, either in thinking about setting aside their time on a Saturday afternoon or a Wednesday evening, or making a year or multi-year commitment.
I find that when I talk to folks about where their volunteer programming has gone wrong, when something breaks down, they have the wrong volunteer, something, a volunteer did something very inappropriate or out of line, or they're not getting the right volunteers, oftentimes, more often than not, this is the point at which things break down. I can't tell you how important it is when you say, when someone advertises a volunteer event that says, anyone can do it. To me that says, well then why should I? Why is my time valuable if anybody could do it? I need to be appealed to myself. Why is it important for me to be there? So say, instead of anybody can do it, family friendly, or get outside and maybe visit or learn or meet some new people. Those things are positive motivations for me, and that's what would drive me towards it. On the opposite side of the coin, saying something is really hard and too much work does the same problem. People don't want to hear that it's going to be super challenging. So be really realistic and be very specific. And then if you have breakdowns in your volunteers' work or their response to your recruitment, then you can evaluate what that recruitment did and did not do authentically. Perhaps the job itself was too large for the people that you're recruiting to, so you need to break it into some smaller pieces. Or perhaps the language you used didn't fit the recruitment venue, and so you need to change up that language to some degree. But it starts with being very specific and accurate. And if you do that, I promise you will solve yourself a lot of problems. Next, please.
So then the other thing that gets people returning is, and then promoting the event is having a really well-structured program. And so, as we were saying earlier that, Kirsten, you said the best source that you get is people letting other people know about it. And so the reason that people will do that is say, hey, I went to the City of Ann Arbor's Natural Area Preservation Division, I went to the Watershed Council, I had a great time, I went to Huron Pines, had a great time, let's go do it together, or you should check out their next one, it's coming up then. So having a quality experience includes all kinds of different things, like introducing them, letting them know the work that's going to be done and how the 4-hour experience or how the multi-year experience is going to lay out for them. So having that be a quality experience for them, asking for their feedback afterwards is another example of a quality experience. Asking for their feedback is another way of showing appreciation. And so being sure not only to show them appreciation and, as we said, that professional volunteer peer-to-peer relationship, but also saying thank you. And saying thank you not only at the event, but afterwards. And some groups do that just electronically, if you've got those electronic contacts, and then other folks will do a thank you card. And a thank you card goes a really long way. And then
Lisa, this is Susan. I'll just add in here, Kristen Lyons writes in that they use their trained stewards to help provide information to the new volunteers, for instance, when they're doing the invasive species polls. So just wanted to provide that as well. Goes to your ladder of engagement.
That's great.
Yeah, and that hits back onto those motivational factors too, right? You're allowing your long-term volunteers to step up into a higher role and utilize the knowledge that they have. One of the theories of appreciation that I've read a couple times is appreciation. It needs to be authentic, obviously. It needs to sound like you actually care and are thankful. It needs to be timely. And so depending on when the thing is over, the thank you comes at a reasonable amount of time frame afterwards or near the end. And it needs to be commensurate with the work that's given. If you over or under appreciate, it feels really awkward. And so giving the right level of thanks for the thing that was given. I have an advanced volunteer who runs a few programs for me, and I don't just say thanks at the end of the event. I take her out to lunch a couple times a year. And we have really, really meaningful conversations about how that program can improve and how she can work to make those improvements. It's empowering to her, but it also tells her that her, to me, the organization, her work is highly valued because I am willing to spend a disproportionate amount of my time listening and talking and working with her.
Why don't we go to the next slide that just talks about, kind of echoes some of the same things that we've just been talking about. What keeps volunteers coming back is that quality experience. So again, showing appreciation, being well organized, having meaningful work, so really talking about the importance of the work being done and understanding the volunteers' motivations. And then let's go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about volunteers and their returning. And as Kirsten, you talked about the trained stewards and having them ramp up to different programs. Jason, you just talked about somebody actually running a program for you as a volunteer.
So the question that I like to ask here is, would you rather spend 80% of your time recruiting new volunteers or 80% of your time keeping your best volunteers? The theory is here that doing the latter, keeping people you've already trained and who are getting stronger and better, while allowing new people to come into the program, certainly, makes your time much more efficient and sets up a scalable structure where you can have more and more empowered volunteers who help take the workload on and then expand it.
So let's go ahead and go to the next slide.
So
Hey, Jason, this is Susan. We just had someone ask if you could elaborate a little more on the ladder of engagement concept.
Yes, I was switching some slides around earlier today, and we're going to hit that in about 3 slides. Thank you. So getting back here to our motivations, why are people volunteering? If you're offering as many of these motivations in as many events as possible, you're going to really be making people feel comfortable and enjoy their time. We build in social time to all of our experiences. Usually there's a small time for a snack or a reflection period where we talk about what happened. And you don't need to have any control over that time, but people will start talking about their experience. And that it makes things really rich, right? They start to bond with each other. They start to bond their experience in their mind with the work and with the place that you're at. And so you're creating connectivity between them and your mission at that point, and that allows them to find more value in that space and that time.
And I'll, as an example of that, Jason, so we do a cluster summit with what we might consider some of our most valuable volunteers, who are cluster coordinators. And one of the things that I think we're just starting to hit right, so it's a 2-day event, and the thought is that we are not only giving them personal and professional development, but we're learning from them about what their challenges are. And so really want to give them something of high value, to really appreciate them for the time that they give all year long. And one of the things that we really realized is we need to build in a lot of downtime, which is that social time for the cluster coordinators to interact with each other, and it's longer than I at first kind of felt comfortable. So if we give people 2.5 hours kind of lunch, and that, are they going to be wanting something more to do or feel like it's not of value? But the value that they get from that chance to interact with their peers is invaluable.
Absolutely. So if we could hit the next slide there, please. So just some ideas about how to keep your volunteers continually engaged. When I started working at my current employer, we had roughly 4 single points in time on the calendar when volunteers could come out. It was very hard for them to stay engaged, aside from like reading our electronic newsletter, which isn't meaningful to those who really want to, work with their hands or be out in the field. And so we've restructured and created a series of programs where there's pretty much no time of the year where they don't have an opportunity to get out and volunteer or come in and work with the staff as a volunteer. They can do data analysis from us. They can do data cleaning from home. They can come in and work in the office on office tasks if they're so inclined. And we've started a series of river cleanups that we didn't do before. So at this point we have 10 river cleanups throughout the year. So there's just a lot more points of engagement that they can come out. So touching them regularly with some sort of communication, offering them the opportunity to cross your programs. So if they're really into water chemistry, do they want to come out and learn about benthics who benefit from water chemistry? If they're really, really interested in being out in the field, in one program, do they also want to learn how to do field work in another program? And don't miss the opportunity to let people know about programs that they may not originally express interest in, because their condition, their life may change over time. You know, they may become more or less physically able. They may, their time may become more constrained or free up at certain points in time. And meeting them where they're at by offering them different programming and different opportunity, let them choose where they want to be when they need to make those changes.
Don't forget about food, kittens, and babies.
And there's always food, kittens, and babies. All three as separate items, of course. And lastly, I like to talk about the ladder of engagement. The ladder of engagement is, think of a first-time volunteer who comes out to do a garlic mustard pull or coming to do a benthic study for just like a half day on a Saturday. That's great. It's a great way to get a lot of people through your doors, experience your organization, and it's really low time commitment, not just for the volunteer, but for your organization. You may have a lot of people that come through those events who think that they want to volunteer long term, but as it turns out, maybe that's not the right place for them. Yours is not the right organization for that individual. And if they come out once or twice on a Saturday and recognize that, oh, that's not the perfect place for me right now, it's really easy to let them go or for them to choose to not be there. Because then they had a great experience and they go on to do something else that fits their interests more, and you don't have to go through a formal process of orientation and training and onboarding, and so that helps a lot. Once they've come to a few events, though, you have to allow people the opportunity to get a little bit more involved. Like was mentioned a number of times now, how can they help lead that event that they've come to 10 or 20 times? Maybe they can help oversee a portion of the group while staff is nearby. And then one of the things that we did when I was at the city is we allowed volunteers and trained volunteers to lead those stewardship work days. They go out and run their own events with the public. They recruit their own public to come to events. So then they become increasingly autonomous. Another way that you allow people to get more engaged is to allow them to start making decisions about the work that you're doing. So having them in on the managerial level, either about the program or about the parameter or the goal. Are we really meeting our educational goals with this program? I asked my lead volunteer that I was talking about earlier. And Janet's a retired school teacher. She knows whether or not we're hitting our educational goals, better than I do, in fact. But allowing her to step into that professional level gets her more engaged, more associated with the mission. And then she's increasingly likely to stick around because she's more invested. And then one of the ultimate levels of engagement, of course, is being on your board. And what better board member than a previous volunteer who really knows what the work on the ground looks like. So thinking about how people can go up and down that ladder within your organization. In fact, it's easier for volunteers to go up and down the ladder than it is for staff in many cases. So.
And with that in mind, the other thing that I wanted to interject here is also, it would be great to know how many of you all online got your jobs because you volunteered with the organization. I know at least, yes, Jason is raising his hand. I know dozens and dozens of people who got their job by volunteering there. So that's also another great chance to both find a fit for an organization. Let's go to the next one and just talk about some of the appreciation. So some of the little nitty gritty here. So there's lots of different ways to appreciate folks. You can have propaganda. Kirsten says, yep, that's how she got her job. Exactly. End of season gathering, holding something that shows, hey, collectively at the end of the season, this is what we did over the course of the year. It can be, all kinds of different things. It can be anything from a gala to a potluck in a park. People do all kinds of different things. Making sure to do public thanks for folks in newsletters, on the web, and at events. Making sure to announce those folks is a really important level of appreciation. So there are in-person things. There are tchotchkes that you can share with people. There's the public thanks. And then, again, like we've hit on a number of times, doing the evaluation is really, really important. So having day of evaluation forms, following up with electronic surveys, or doing focus groups or getting key advice, like Jason was saying, from one of his volunteer peers about how's the program doing. So those are all different ways to evaluate, but evaluating the work is really important.
Next slide, please. We would be remiss not to mention the boring portions of volunteer management. You do need to think through wisely how you're going to keep their information. Is it in an Excel spreadsheet? Is it on a piece of paper? Is it in a database that you buy that manages volunteers? Is it in a database that one of your volunteers makes for you? All of these things are possible. It's really about the size and scope of your programming and what you want to accomplish with it. Just remember, the more you want the system to do, the more effort it takes, and therefore time and or money. And then, of course, there's liability and safety to be thought of and thought through well. And both of these are things that we could have an entire talk about also. So we're just gonna fly through those really quickly.
That's exactly right. And why don't we just go to the next one? And that's certainly we could do a 3-day workshop on volunteers. And so Jason and I wanted to just give you kind of a general overview and outline of the kinds of things that we think through when we think about setting up volunteer opportunities for folks. And again, recruitment never ever stops. The thing that I always say over and over again is, Coca-Cola continues to advertise. So as we are doing, and doesn't the entire world know what Coca-Cola is? And so as we are out there with our messages, we could do a whole workshop on this, on communication and something else. But we need to constantly get the word out there to get new volunteers. And we can talk also a little bit about diverse volunteers. I think it's really important when we're talking about putting the information out, and Jason touched on it in terms of tailoring your message, making sure that you're doing it in multiple different languages depending on the community that you live. And so making sure that your recruitment is ongoing, well done, and we'd be happy to share more ideas and stories. And at this point, what we want to do is turn it over to Joy to give us some more specific examples. In the meantime, feel free to keep your questions and comments coming, because we'll be happy to answer them in the chat, and look forward to hearing about Huron-Hines' great volunteer program.
Great. Thank you, Jason. And Lisa, of course, we'll be hearing more from you. And thanks for reminding folks. Please keep your questions and comments coming, and we can certainly integrate them into the conversation and or return to them. So thanks, and Joy, welcome.
Hi, everybody. This is Joy Lyson from Huron-Hines. Wow, some really great information there from Jason and Lisa. Thanks so much for those great thoughts on motivating volunteers and how to recruit successfully. So for my part of the webinar today, I'll be building on Jason and Lisa's presentation by sharing a few case studies of some different events that we posted here at Huron-Hines and some of the strategies that we use to recruit for those. Next slide, please. Okay, but before I dive into it, just a little bit of introduction to who we are at Huron-Hines. We're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to protect the Great Lakes by conserving the forests, lakes, and streams of our region here in Northeast Michigan. And we do that by we complete restoration projects that reconnect and improve the health of rivers and upland and coastal habitat. And we see our role beyond our on-the-ground work. We see our role in our region being to really pull together partnerships and bring people together, because that's how we can achieve success in making our region a better place to live and work and enjoy. So we're constantly striving to connect community members to the incredible natural areas here in Northeast Michigan. And what we really want to demonstrate is how healthy natural resources benefit people too. And so volunteer events are really important for our organization. We know that these can be used as a really good platform and a tool to bring our conservation projects to life and have really productive conversations with people and between people who come from diverse backgrounds. Next slide, please. So Huron-Hines has been working in Northeast Michigan since 1973, but it wasn't until 2009 that we began a dedicated volunteer program. We started it because we realized that developing the program would help us meet new people and cultivate support for our mission, just like Lisa and Jason talked a lot about earlier. But also for us, it was really important to start this program because actually hosting events in different communities around our service area helped us to begin to establish a tangible presence and a web of connections in these different communities. We our organization serves a very large area of 11 counties here in Michigan. And so it's important to actually be out there and able to meet and connect with people. So just a quick snapshot of some of the types of events that we lead at here on Pines. They run the gamut from your more traditional direct hands-on experiences where you're picking up a shovel and working on an on-the-ground project beside our staff. We also have events that are a little bit more experiential in nature. So these are things like project tours and special celebrations. And these types of events are really important to us for helping build relationships with community members and move people up that ladder of engagement that we spoke about earlier. So we host a bunch of different events each year, and our goal is to engage, because every volunteer is motivated by a different type of activity and a different experience. We try to offer a range of different ways they can participate based on their different interests and ability levels. And so since 2009, our volunteers have spent more than 10,000 hours participating in our volunteer events, which is just incredible. So now, after giving a little bit of background about our organization and the beginnings of our volunteer program, I'll just shift into sharing. I want to share today 3 specific examples of some events that we posted recently and what they looked like and how specifically we went about recruiting for each. Next slide, please. All right, so the first case study that I'd like to talk about today is an example of, a more traditional volunteer event, which is really focused on completing a certain amount of on-the-ground work. This is an event where we needed a lot of people power to get a lot of work done. And this event is our annual signature service project, and it's held every May. So this year's project took place in Pigeon River Country State Forest, which is a really special place because it's the largest contiguous block of state-owned land in Michigan's Lower Peninsula. And it's a really important area both ecologically because it's home to Michigan's elk herd, and it's also culturally really important. It's a big part of our identity here in Northeast Michigan. And so for this project, we had 130 volunteers that signed up to come out. And they tackled a range of tasks, ranging from building an ADA accessible gravel path. We had people planting native plants for pollinators. They were building trails, and one really cool part of the project was there's a historic building in the forest which is going to be opened as an interpretive center to help future visitors experience and understand some of the history of the forest. And so our volunteers for this project actually got to do some painting and cleaning to that historic building and prepare it then to be opened as an interpretive center. Just a huge amount of work being accomplished by a lot of people coming together in one day. Next slide, please. So this project, you can see just how many people we had out there. This project obviously had a lot of moving parts, and so I'd just like to share a few strategies that we used in this case to recruit volunteers that helped make it so successful. So for one thing, Huron Pines took a very inclusive approach to planning this event by involving another nonprofit group, the Pigeon River Country Association, as well as the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, in meetings to really nail down and outline the themes, goals, and logistics of our event. So like Jason was talking about earlier, it's so important to really define what are the goals, what do we want to accomplish here. And by communicating really regularly with those groups and partners, this allowed us to compile the most meaningful set of activities that volunteers could tackle during the event. And it also gave us a lot more reach in terms of recruiting because our partner organizations were very well connected with forest stakeholders and other groups like master gardeners. And so because we had so much regular communication during planning, that set us up for successful recruiting because we were able to have a united front agreement about the goals of the event, and that helped us use consistent, appropriate language as everyone promoted the event in different venues through their contacts. And, some of the traditional tools for recruiting, like press releases, posting of flyers, like Lisa talked about earlier, definitely took advantage of all of those things to get, the most people that we could out for this event. So one more interesting thing about this case is that we received RSVPs from this large group of registrants. And so then that led us to incorporate another element into the event. We knew we were going to have a big group of people out there getting a lot of good work done. And so we sent an invitation out to some community leaders to come out to the event and tour the project in action taking place with the project leaders. And so this gave us an opportunity to expand the impact of the event by showcasing the incredible value of volunteer service and the hard work that volunteers were doing on that day. Next slide. Thank you. So the second case study I'd like to talk about today is a little bit smaller scale event, our Jack Pine Planting Day. So our part of Michigan is home to the Kirtland's warbler, which is a rare songbird with a really incredible story. And this bird relies on human management for its habitat. It's a ground nesting warbler. It needs large areas of young jack pine trees, and it needs the sandy soils that we have here in Northeast Michigan. And so when we reached out to recruit volunteers to this event, obviously planting trees is a very fun, feel-good type activity. And so we talked a lot about that in the promotion. Volunteers were being requested to come help us plant 2 acres of jack pine trees. But for our organization, this event is a little bit different from the last one because in our mind, the importance of this event is less about the on-the-ground work and more important for the opportunity for understanding and sharing that it brought for our event participants. And we talked a little bit about the importance of that earlier, having that time for people to connect around natural resources and talk about their experience and why we care about conservation of this special bird. And so the volunteers, yes, they had the opportunity to walk away with the satisfaction of planting, thousands of trees in one day, but also just a really special opportunity to hear about how state and federal agencies and nonprofit groups are all working together to ensure that the bird will continue to thrive after once being at the brink of extinction. So, this event was a really powerful opportunity for people to learn and share and also do some good work at the same time. Next slide, please. So this is actually the 3rd year that we had the Jack Pine Planting Day event, and there's a couple of good takeaways for recruiting both new and returning volunteers that I can share. First, we have had several volunteers who each year have traveled, quite a distance to attend the event. Even though most years it's been just the most awful, rainy, miserable weather, but still they keep coming back. And when I asked one couple about what brought them back each time, they shared that it was that opportunity to gather with people who also love the Kirtland's warbler that they're so passionate about. And these volunteers actually shared that the event falls on their birthday weekend, and so they they choose to come out and give back to celebrate their birthday. And so, one good takeaway is that as you learn more about your volunteers and what motivates them, you can try to incorporate just a little special touch to make them feel appreciated. We want to retain awesome volunteers like this, and so now each year at the event we have just a little birthday gift waiting there for them. This year it was a copy of a book on the Kirkland warbler signed by our staff. So then for recruiting new volunteers, we also tried something a little bit different for this event this year. We reached out to a local excavating business to talk with them about, were their employees interested in volunteerism and conservation? So we had our staff actually go to the company at their building, kind of give an overview of what we do, and actually gave a survey about the kinds of volunteer opportunities that their employees would be interested in participating in. And so as a result of that feedback, we planned our event with the group in mind. And not only did they come out with a group of more than 10 of their employees, that's some of them in the picture on the left there, but they also brought coffee and donuts, and that's for everyone who was there at the event. And so they wanted to even participate at a deeper level than just a basic volunteer. They wanted to support and help sponsor the event being a success. So this example of contacting a company directly turned out to be a really positive way to begin building a relationship with a local business. And it's been a relationship which has continued to grow even after the event as they strive to incorporate more and more conservation practices in their excavating work that they do. So for me, this is just a good story about how to meet and creatively partner with other sort of non-traditional business partners and find out where you share common ground and how you can work together. And just one more thing to note from this example is that at Huron Pines events, we always try to have as much board and staff representation as we can. And just having our people there to mingle with volunteers, get to know them, ask questions, and find out what motivates them, and just to thank the volunteers personally for the time they're devoting, that's really valuable, and it helps the volunteers build a deeper connection with our staff and our board in our work. Next slide. Okay, so my third and final example today is a little bit different. It involves a different type of event. So we've found that often in the conservation world, we are doing all of these amazing, impactful projects, and then we often move on and keep doing more. But we haven't really taken the opportunity to celebrate and gather around the energy from our successes. So that's why the last few years we've been planning and leading more special events, which have been well received by participants, but also a powerful tool for moving people along that spectrum of engagement, that ladder of engagement. So some examples of these types of events are celebrations like Project Groundbreaking, shown here in the top two photos. These were events celebrating dam removal. We've done adventure tour type events, like the bottom right photo. We took some volunteers out to Charity Island, where we've been working to restore habitat for the pitcher's thistle. And we've also led some project tours that connect people with the science behind our work in an interactive way. So this is the type of event where we really strive to bring non-traditional participants together to share ideas and really take advantage of those fresh ideas and the fresh knowledge that you can gain from people coming from different backgrounds. And also it helps to build a sense of pride for these places that, when we bring people out to see and touch and experience the places that we're working on projects, it makes them feel more invested and more eager to protect these areas. So typically at these events, we might promote them and recruit in sort of an invite-only way, which allows us to sort of strategically build our list of attendees to make a dynamic group of new and non-traditional partners that can have valuable conversations. So for this case study, I want to talk about one specific event, which is a wildlife habitat tour that we held last fall. Next slide, please. So for this event, a wildlife habitat tour, it was a really fun day. We rented a bus and planned out a series of stops showcasing, you can see the tour map in the upper left there. But we wanted to showcase some recent work we were doing to restore high-quality habitat areas. And so at each stop, volunteers got a chance to see firsthand native plantings and restoration projects in action, and also that networking opportunity again. They had a chance to have real dialogue with forestry, wildlife management experts about the need for and value of these projects. So, and then we also had a hands-on component of the day where participants could plant a tree at one of the sites and kind of have that feel-good feeling of helping to restore one of the project sites. Back to the idea of the importance of that networking time, what I found really interesting about this day is that one of the best parts was the bus ride in between the sites. If you can imagine, we're bumping up and down these dirt roads through the forest, and there was just this really positive roar of conversation between people networking and sharing ideas. Just a great vibe and just a great chance for people to talk about the importance of conservation. So for promoting this event and recruiting people to attend, we contacted directly some non-traditional groups like specifically oil and gas companies that have operated wells across northern Michigan. And we had a really great representation from those companies and interesting conversation because, we're learning lessons about how to best restore decommissioned gas well sites. And so after making those connections with people in that industry, we've been successfully able to recruit their employees for traditional volunteer events after that. So I think that's kind of my takeaway for this example is that while this type of event isn't a traditional, like, on-the-ground, completing work volunteer event, in the sense you might think of, it's a powerful tool for future recruitment because what we've done here is we've started to build a relationship and a connection with people who are then more likely to come out for a day and join us for a volunteer project. So just taking the time to build relationships through engaging events like this, we found it really valuable for future recruitment. Next slide. So the 3 case studies that I selected are it's just kind of a sampling of some of the different types of events and strategies that we use to recruit and retain volunteers. So just, I guess, some takeaways from my portion here would be to kind of expand your reach with recruiting volunteers and kind of tapping into new circles of contact. Think about involving partner groups or, like in Jason's example, volunteers themselves in planning the event. But make sure that you're on the same page enough to ensure that the language about the event and the goals of the event are going to be consistent throughout all those communications. Another takeaway is just making sure to show your great volunteers, and especially your great returning volunteers, that they are so appreciated by just taking the time to listen to what motivates them, following up after the event, reconnecting from time to time, and incorporating thoughtful touches when you can to show that you remember them and you value them and remember their conversation. So thirdly, trying creative approaches to recruit volunteers from within their social circles. So, for example, the business example of having a staff come out as a team, can in some cases be more successful than trying to recruit volunteers directly one-on-one. That social element, that team building component can be a powerful motivator to get people out to your event. And lastly, just thinking about using special events and tours for relationship building, thinking about also future event recruitment. This could be the first step towards building a base of really committed volunteers. So that kind of concludes my portion of the presentation here. I think now we'll be opening up the floor for some questions and discussion from everyone.
Great. Joy, thank you. And all of you for just these wonderful examples of really tailoring and thoughtful approaches to engaging the community in a variety of ways. One thing I just want to put out there initially is to open up questions, and audience members, feel free to get those questions going in the question function. But one thing, as we were planning for this, talk a little bit about how, and maybe your presentation addressed this a bit, but if you want to elaborate at all on kind of different ways that you think about or approach communicating the value of restoration and conservation projects to diverse audiences. I think you all touched on that in your presentations, but feel free to elaborate here as well.
Yeah, this is Joy. I'll take the first stab at that one. I think Jason talked a little bit about this earlier in the importance of meeting people where they are with their language. So, if you're trying to recruit volunteers that are coming from more of a technical perspective, like let's say my example with volunteers from the oil and gas industry, I'd talk with them in a different way than I would with a family who wants to plant some trees with their kids. So kind of using the same types of language that people use in their everyday life and meeting them where they are.
Yeah, and so we recruit for our benthic study in as many places as we can. We can fit in a lot of people on those days. And I've taken to recruiting through all the local junior high schools and college campuses. And so when I send it to a fraternity, I'm like, it's fun, it's team building, it's a volunteer experience. And in the exact same border, but the email start, the invitation to the recipient, when I send it to a high school guidance counselor or principal, says, this meets a bunch of benchmarks, and it's a great collaboration tool with some teachers that we've worked with at your school. And so, the bulk of the information might be the same, but the tailoring is very specific.
Right, if you're talking about a church group, you might talk about stewardship and other kinds of things. And so I think using language that is specific to each audience is really important. Another thing I want to get at is a couple questions that other folks have asked online. The question of, I wanted to make sure that we pointed out that they're professional volunteer coordinators. So Jason, maybe you want to talk about that as a field, because you are, not only are you, and you have been for a couple decades, but you're also certified in a program. And so as a profession, there's that. And then I want to get at the question that came online about paid versus unpaid.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of introductions to that conversation about what level of professionalism does your volunteer program have. And I would say it's absolutely great to have a person who's dedicated to volunteer management, because that that helps ensure that the volunteers have some consistency in your organization. I see my role, even though almost all of our staff work with volunteers, I see my role as ensuring that all of those experiences have some base level of positive experience and that we're cross-pollinating experiences and lessons learned across the organization. And so having somebody who has a certain level of authority in volunteer management within the organization really ups the game of the organization and how they're interacting with people, because you put somebody in charge and all of a sudden they take charge of it. Not too dissimilarly, a lot of the volunteer management white papers and advocacy groups speak to the volunteer manager should be top-level management just under the CEO, and having that person be under somebody else buried in the organization does a disservice to the volunteers. And one of the ways that I get after that, to make that conversation recognizable to some people, I say, I oversee 10 times more volunteers than my boss does, and my boss is the CEO. And every year, and my job is to escalate that number of occurrences also, whereas hers may or may not be.
Right. So Jason, we also talked real quick, Kirsten asked about how do you get certified?
Oh, so there is an international certification for volunteer management for anybody who's been in the field for 3 years full-time or similar, and it's through the certification of the Council for Certification of Volunteer Administration, the CCVA, and it pulls up under Google search, just do certification for volunteer administration. And they have there's a test, there's a study material, and then there's basically you have to write a theory, your own personal theory of volunteerism or volunteer management, which I found extremely valuable in reflecting on why I think volunteerism is important in our community, and what it accomplishes and why it accomplishes those things. But having the navel gaze around why this thing is really, really important from your perspective, again, I found it extremely valuable. And then it mandates that you do continuing education, which is, of course, good for any professional. And yeah, I would recommend it. And those who are in really specialized industries like healthcare and things like that have separate certification for their volunteer administrators. But this one is across any geography worldwide.
And there's also a conference?
In the conference is a different entity, but the National Conference on Volunteerism and Service, which is put on by the Points of Light, moves around the country every year. In this next summer of 2017, it'll be in Seattle, and again, it's put on by the Points of Light out of Atlanta, Georgia.
Great, thanks. It's very cool. I mean, to think about being able to say, as you say, Kirsten, is that a thing? Being able to say to young people, you could be a volunteer coordinator. So one of the other things thinking about, I want to make sure to get to Brooke's question, but I also wanted to make sure that we talk about volunteers and the value of volunteer hours. And so we haven't touched on the fact that when you're writing grants, your volunteer time is a valuable, valuable, valuable part of a grant budget, and can make your case even stronger. And so typically when grants are written, you are allowed to calculate volunteer hours as match at a rate that's a little bit over $20 right now. And you can, and each time I do it, I Google it and find out what it is for the year, and I Google volunteer rate without, thank you very much. The value of volunteer time is something that you can put in there. And for most grants, that is something that you can use. There are some federal and state grants that require you to use minimum wage for the value of that volunteer time, which is about a third, close to a third less than that. So I thought it was a joke, another reason to advocate for higher minimum wage.
And when I value my volunteers, I just put up in the chat box, I put up the independent sector is the third-party organization that values volunteer time. And you can use the national average here in the U.S., or you can go state by state. I do not know if there's an international standard for other countries. And so I'll use the state average here in Michigan when I'm doing general volunteering for like garlic mustard polls and things of that nature. But when I'm talking about in-kind volunteers, I ask them what their hourly wage is for whatever they do for, if they're giving pro bono volunteering, I ask them what their average wage is, and I put that into our database.
Great.
And man, those dollars add up real fast.
Right, so this is the volunteer professional rate. So then let's go back to kind of organizational capacity, and Jason, what you were talking about, and get at both Brooke's question about how do you talk to other staff and board about bringing volunteer programs on board, and then also Danielle's question about struggling with the intake of folks that email or contact other staffers randomly and then forward those to her. And so how do you deal, what's the formal response and process for sorting that intake of folks? And I think that Joy, you and Jason will certainly have thoughts, and I've got thoughts about that too. So I don't know if, Joy, you want to jump in and talk about some of that first? Maybe as she's unmuting, Jason, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So there are generally two different models of volunteer management for mid to large organizations. One is decentralized, so that's sort of to Danielle's question, where each program manager will do their own recruitment and train their own volunteers for their own program. And the other model is a centralized volunteer clearinghouse that does all the recruitment for the organization, assists all the departments. And those departments, there may be 2 departments with 50 different programs, or there may be 50 different departments with 5,000 staff. It kind of doesn't matter. But the idea of, are the volunteers all coming through one person, or are they, coming to your programs through each program? And in some ways, it doesn't really matter what the volunteers are doing. As long as you have an internal structure that supports that decision, then the staffers know, oh, hey, this person is a new volunteer. We need to send them through the volunteer clearinghouse, the volunteer manager, the volunteer center for the organization, because they need process, they need to get into the system, they need to go through orientation. But in some organizations, decentralizing that is fine also, as long as everybody knows it, and you can get the whole organization to come on board with some of the things that we talked about in our presentation, like cross-pollinating the volunteers across programs so that they understand that the organization is getting more things done than the initial point of contact.
And certainly sharing that within a staff meeting can be really helpful, because a volunteer may contact me and I might say, oh, great, they look great for me, but in fact, they're better suited to volunteer with you, Jason, within the organization. And so making sure that that information is shared.
And I would say sharing that and cross-pollinating that over and over and over again is important.
Yeah. And then, go ahead, Joy. Yep.
Oh, yeah, this is Joy. Sorry, I didn't realize I was on mute before, but I can kind of touch on the sort of board staff involvement, kind of how to get them on board with participating with your volunteers. One thing is just to make sure that they all know, like we just talked about, that there is tangible value to the volunteer investment in your organization, and just making sure that they understand how that can be leveraged to make your organization able to do even more good work because you have that investment from your volunteers. I would say not only is it great for your board to be present and talking with volunteers at events, but it's also beneficial to the board member themselves, because I don't know about you guys, but there's just nothing more inspiring that makes you feel like you just really are happy with the work that you're doing than being out there for a volunteer day, actually seeing that energy, seeing the on-the-ground work and excitement happening. So I guess just kind of pointing out how it benefits everyone to have that investment and have them there on board.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's a great question, and I know that I work with really hundreds and hundreds of different organizations, and so I've watched this play out in a number of different settings. Everything from state government, who thinks about working with volunteers, and really have watched the transformation. And so I've seen the upfront resistance to it, and that resistance is a number of things related to Kirsten and Danielle, your question about that, in terms of boy, how do we intake them? How do we do it? How do we have the capacity to do this? And then also the quality control and quality assurance. How can we ensure that they're going to do good work? Because in fact, they are doing work on behalf of your organization. So that's why we talk a lot about making it a professional experience for them as volunteers, but also because they really are representing your organization. So that's an important thing. And Sharing, I think, success stories is another great way. So there's I've got a vision for how this can look within my organization, and sure, I want you to take my word for it. But then there's also sharing success stories. So some of the stories that we've told you now, and I would be happy to serve as a resource for anybody who's struggling with that within their organization to share some of those stories. Moving on to maybe another subject. Jason, you want to talk about systems for keeping track of volunteers? With, you get spreadsheets, or you got...
Don't use pieces of paper. Don't use pieces of paper. I mean, we have sign-in sheets. I really love to have sign-in sheets so that I have an actual record of what happened at the event. But then they'll get scanned in and put into the computer and hidden away. Nobody ever sees them again once that data goes into a database. For a vast majority of small organizations, a slightly complicated Excel spreadsheet is completely sufficient. You put it on Google, and all of a sudden all of your staff from anywhere can access it. And the things you want to track are obviously contact information, and how much they volunteer, how often, for what. If you have a little bit more capacity, start looking into what are their interests, how often are they coming back or not coming back. Again, a little bit more effort to put into it. How often are you contacting them, for what reasons, and what is their response rate? Once you get into that level of complexity, and you're starting to put in dozens and dozens of hours per year in your volunteer management software, let's say, I would recommend going over to some software that's explicitly about personnel management, volunteer management, or a donor volunteer database, depending on your organization. Once you get into that, you're going to be spending a fair amount of time. Our organization uses a donor volunteer database, and we probably put in a couple hundred hours every year into managing the data. But we can tell exactly how well certain people are performing and how that's changing over time, what our recruitment and retention rates are for different programs, and cross-pollinate that against a donor history. These things are really valuable, but your organization really needs to make a commitment to that time, or else it's just, if you're not going to use that end product, don't put the time in to begin with. And if you're really at a place where you have 2 staff and you're doing 4 different types of events, or one type of event a bunch of times, maybe a spreadsheet is completely sufficient for you. There are a number of online free, one of the questions came up, is there a free volunteer management software? And I did find some under a quick Google search just now, but I haven't used any of them, so I'm not willing to recommend them. But you could look them up on your own. There are a number of free scheduling services on the internet that I've used for volunteers, that some of us use for scheduling meetings and events also. But those are great ways. Sign Up Genius is one that our office uses a lot, to schedule people into shifts. And it's free. The problem is, how do you get it out of there and into a database where you record what people's actual giving was, is another matter of focus.
And as Kirsten says, you haven't gotten that sophisticated yet, but you see it looming. One of the other things that I wanted to talk about, both in the context of this question here, but also in the context of how do you talk to your board and organization about embracing volunteers in the organization, is understanding that it takes time to build this. And so the program that Jason, the story that I often tell about the program that Jason runs now, that has hundreds of people at 4 events throughout the year, started out the first time I used to work for that organization, and the first event had 4 people, and 3 of them were staff. And so you need to understand that it does take time to build something up. And, there are, that can be hard for some people who view the number of people at an event as success. And I personally don't, because I think it all depends on who you get. And a quick story that I have on that is we were doing a 3-part series on invasive species control that went through ecological impact, ID, and control methods. And for the very first half-day workshop, they were all full-day workshops, we had 3 people signed up. So we've got 2 trainers. Is it worth it to do this? So yes, it is. I drive across state, get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, take my statewide expert on doing this, and hold my head high and go off to do this training. As it turns out, 2 of the staff we're staff people from a local park that have been trying to do this. We then do the next training. There are 6 people there, so doubling in numbers. We do the final training. There are 12 people there. And the call that makes it the most meaningful is that 2 of the 3 that came to the first event, as I said, were park staff people. I get a call from their boss 1 month later that says, I cannot believe the transformation in these guys. We used to have people calling to volunteer with us, and they would not engage with them. They would not do this work, and they are now doing it. And so that's my little lesson of take the time. It takes time to build these things, and then also help your folks understand that. And then Taylor asked another question that kind of then we can segue into with it, which is how do you get the most people? So you want to start to advertise it, and what's the limited resources, and what are the most productive methods for getting people out?
The most efficient way to get more volunteers, hands down, is ask your volunteers to bring a family member with them.
Mm-hmm.
You will get 50% return rate on that one question in certain circumstances, and they will have generally they will have a better time because they're also building that into their family structure or inviting their friends out or making friends. And it takes an email, a singular email to do that. And yeah, so I would say that that's one that you should try out at some point if you haven't already.
Lisa, that sounds like a great capstoning comment here for the webinar. We just have a couple of minutes left, and wanted to see if there's give you all an opportunity, Jason, Lisa, and Joy, just to provide any parting thoughts to the audience here today before we wrap up.
Yes, my parting thought, I want to echo Susan's comment that she made, which is thanks so much for sharing how you can increase the fabric of our society by engaging people in natural resources work. And so I think that getting people outside, getting people with their hands on the land and in the water is incredibly valuable for the health of our communities and our ecosystems. And so, as I say, this work is all about relationship. It's about our own relationships to ourselves, our relationship to each other, our relationships to our larger community, and then our relationship to the natural world in which we live. And I think that volunteerism is really a hallmark for that work. And I applaud all of you online who are engaged in doing this work, and look forward to continuing to learn from you over the years as we do this together.
Thank you.
This is Joy. Yeah, just in closing, I want to add to Lisa's comments there. Certainly appreciate all the good work that everyone's out there doing, and I agree that volunteerism just helps build that really strong fabric of community that just makes a community such a satisfying thing to be a part of. And for me, I think, we've talked about it on the webinar today a couple of times, but just realizing that the experience of your volunteer, it's not just a one-on-one relationship between you and the volunteer in your organization. The power in the volunteer event comes from that connection, that networking, that chance for people to share and build community together. So it's such a powerful thing, and I'm happy to be a part of the discussion today.
Thank you, Joy.
And I think my closing comment, not too dissimilar, I suppose, having read a bunch about the history of volunteer management and how the struggle was so great just a few decades ago to have any sense that this industry was of actual value to the greater community. I see us having come so far, and that's fabulous. And very similarly, the industry of ecological restoration and environmental stewardship having struggled for decades, and especially in land management, even just 20 years ago, being in its infancy in some ways in our Western culture, having that conversation be such a different and so much more deep and rich for the citizens and for our cohabitants on this planet. It's so relieving to me to see that change. And my co-presenter said those things better than I could.
Not at all.
Thank you all.
Yeah, and thank you to Keystone Policy Center and Susan and your team for putting this on, and to all of you online for taking the time to be with us.
Indeed, indeed. Couple quick wrapping up housekeeping comments. We will announce through Glenn, through Lisa's network, and your all, and as well as everybody who signed on here, information about how to, once we have the archived webinar and presentations and recording, we'll make sure that we get that information out so that if, for folks who wish to view this at a later date. We're having another webinar on August 30th, a week from today. The topic is on strategies for incorporating placemaking approaches into restoration and conservation projects, and with a similarly stellar set of panelists. So we look forward to that, and we'll send a reminder on that out through Glenn here shortly. Lastly, and again, thank you to Lisa, Jason, and Joy. Really appreciated you sharing your deep expertise and experience. So thanks again.
You're very welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Well,
Take care, Brett. Bye-bye.